Hi everyone, my name is Adriel, and today I'm going to sort of just show you the difference between Photoshop and Illustrator. Um, I'm going to be making a whole series of tutorials on how Illustrator works and how you can kind of approach it, because I've heard from a lot of people that it has a very steep learning curve and it's sort of intimidating. And I know Photoshop can be a lot more approachable, but I want to just demonstrate why sometimes it's better to use Illustrator other than Photoshop. So the first thing that I want to talk about is that they are completely different tools. So for instance, some things such as like photo manipulation are going to work way better in Photoshop, whereas some things such as like creating a logo are going to be a lot easier and a lot cleaner in Illustrator. So just keep in mind that there's difference between what you can do in each program, so beginning to learn both of them is going to give you a better understanding about which one is good for what application and kind of let you work seamlessly between the two programs, because that's what they're designed for. So to begin with, what's the difference? I kind of mentioned that they're a little bit different, but let me kind of explain it in more detail. So I'm going to create a new Illustrator document to just sort of show this off. I'm going to just make it in inches, and I'm going to make it 8 by 8 because that's what my Photoshop document is in that I have open in the other tab. So let me just do that really fast. You'll see there's things such as bleed and color modes and stuff. All of that and raster effects, we'll get to that. All of this is for print and how your final thing is going to be displayed. So if you are working with like a poster or something, that you'll need to focus on this. But for right now, since we're just learning the program and getting things figured out, you can ignore all of these. So that should have created one. We will wait and see. Here we go. It's a little bit of a beefy program, so sometimes it runs a little bit slow. So right now I have two identical documents open in Photoshop and in Illustrator. In Photoshop, it looks like this. This is just your standard 8 by 8 document, untitled, no layers. Same thing with this. You might notice that my layout is a little bit weird compared to yours, so I'm going to go ahead and just reset it so that we're all working on the same page. So you can do that by going to Window, here we are, Workspace. So I'm just going to go ahead and new Workspace to save the one that I have. I'll just leave it untitled, that's fine. And then we're going to go back and do Workspace, Reset Essentials, there we go. So now you can see my program is exactly like yours should look. And I had a bunch of other stuff because I use them often, but we can go over them, and anything that you need is going to be in this window right here. So now what's the actual difference? I think the easiest way is going to be to demonstrate this. So I'm going to go ahead and make a circle just in Illustrator, and I'm going to remove the stroke. Actually, I'm going to swap that so that's black and remove the stroke. And then I'm going to do the same thing in Photoshop. Instead of drawing out a circle like I did there, on this one I'm going to just make a circle selection and Alt backspace to fill it with my foreground color. Okay, so you might have noticed there's some difference in how you actually go about making something. That's because these two work on very different things. So what I've been dancing around here is Illustrator works in vectors. Now what that means is this right here is not necessarily a circle, it is a math equation that is telling the computer to render a circle. And as opposed to Photoshop, where this is a circle of pixels just mapped out on a pixel grid. So if we zoom in really close to the edge, you can start to see where the pixels come in, and you can kind of see this anti-aliasing. That's what this is called right here, where it goes from a light gray to a medium gray into the black, so it's not just pixels. That is what Photoshop does. That is called a bitmap. And for Illustrator, this is a vector graphic. So what that means is if we zoom in really close onto the side, we can do this infinitely. We're getting to the point now where the circle is going to start to look like a straight line. This is as far as it'll go, but you can see I'm at an absolutely ridiculous number on the zoom in. So I'm going to hit Control and 0 to go back to the full view, and I'm going to do the same on this. So just to be completely clear, if you have both programs, I want you to go ahead and do the same thing and kind of mess with it yourself to see what I'm saying as I explain sort of what the difference is. I mentioned that bitmaps, that's what Photoshop uses. That's stuff like your JPEGs, your PNGs. Those are all just a grid of pixels that each individual pixel is coded as a color, and that's how your computer renders it. Meanwhile, in Illustrator, this is a vector. Now, I am not a mathematician, and if you are watching this, you might not be either, but feel free to go ahead and do some research on that. It's pretty interesting. But as you can see here, this line is dictated by these points. And we're going to go over this more when I talk about the pen tool, because it gets very interesting. But as you can see, I can manipulate this, and the whole shape will change based on where this handle is and what angle it's at. So the main thing here is that it's important to remember that Illustrator is not working with a bitmap. It is working in vectors. So you would usually save these as like an SVG file if you wanted to preserve it as a vector graphic, or you could save it as a PNG and Illustrator will convert it into a bitmap for you. So why is this important? Like, why would you even bother, since it's kind of confusing and the learning curve is a bit of a brick wall? The main thing is, if you're doing something in like super high print, such as like a billboard, you don't want to start in Photoshop at like 50 feet by 30 feet at 300 dpi. DPI being dots per inch, that's what your print resolution would be. That will crash your computer. That will be an absolute nightmare. Instead, you can work with it in Illustrator at a much smaller scale and then scale it up without having to worry about any sort of pixelization or any weirdness like that. So like for instance, in Photoshop, I'm going to go ahead and make a new document to sort of show this to you. I'm going to make it just really small. I'm going to make it like an inch by an inch. And then we're going to go ahead and just add some random nonsense to this, just in different colors, so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. As you can see already, the edges of these circles and ellipses are kind of fuzzy because we're working at such a small scale. And this doesn't have to be anything important. I just want to demonstrate this. So that's what it's going to look like. Now, if I go and say image size, and I blow this bad boy up to 8 inches by 8 inches, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this to a more reasonable scaling, so you can see, typically if you're scaling something up, this preserve detail 2.0 is the best way to do it, but I'm going to go with the bicubic, just because that's typically the standard one, and that's the option we've had for the longest time. And okay, I scaled it the wrong way, so let me redo that. But as you can see, that has absolutely butchered the image. So if we do that again, but we do it correctly, image size, 8 inches by 8 inches, 300 pixels an inch. Okay. Now you can see you're getting a lot of very fuzzy artifacts. As you can see, this blue going into this orange has left all of these like lighter bits of orange here when we know for a fact that this is a solid color. You're not going to get that sort of problem in Illustrator. So let's say we can't really scale the same way in Illustrator, so I'm going to have to do this example a little bit differently. But if we make just a couple of circles that are, say, like an inch by an inch just on their own, we should be able to see sort of what I'm talking about. Okay. We're just going to make these some random colors once again, and we can hold Alt to duplicate an object. Just that's a little bit easier than drawing it out multiple times. Cool. So now we're going to take these just all together, and I'm going to scale them up to fit the whole 8x8 canvas. I say canvas, it's actually called an artboard in Illustrator. That's not a super important distinction, but I might as well be as accurate as possible here. And as you can see, this scaling has done nothing to the quality. You can zoom in infinitely, and you're never going to get the same sort of artifacts that you might in Photoshop. So that's the main difference. So if you're the sort of person who's wondering, like, why would I even bother touching Illustrator if I've already spent all this time learning Photoshop? It's because they're for different things. And you can do a lot with Illustrator. I'm just going to show off something that I did recently. Just going to go ahead and open recent file, open up this map that I made. Now, this was something that I made for a game jam. I'm going to hit Control quote to hide the grid so you can kind of see this a little bit better. But all of these assets I've made in Photoshop, in Illustrator. Whereas this background here with the tiling is all a normal like PNG file. But you can see that the assets that I've made in Illustrator are a lot cleaner, and they can be exported at any size and like scaled however I want them. And I mostly just did this not because of the necessity of infinite scaling for what I was using this project for, but just because you can get so many very clean lines and gradients and meshes using Illustrator. And those are all things that I'm going to go into later on.